Joining us now to discuss it more, former acting ICE director and former chief of the Border Patrol, Ron Vitiello. Ron, thanks for taking time on Saturday. You just heard Alex Hogan's report there from the RGV, undeniably ground zero for Biden's border crisis. I want to ask you, as someone who was in charge of the Border Patrol and ICE, did Vice President Harris miss an opportunity by going to the RGV, perhaps instead of or in addition to El Paso?
I believe she did. There was an opportunity for her to look at the problem where it is the most acute, where your reporter Alex Hogan is right now. The Rio Grande Valley has always been a place over historical statistics for the Border Patrol where Central American migrants choose to cross, or more accurately, where the smugglers bring them. And so more than twice the apprehensions in RGV versus where the vice president visited in El Paso. And where she was at in El Paso, she was stone's throw away from a 30-foot fence that protects the border right there at Juarez and El Paso, Texas. And so, yeah, I think they missed an opportunity to see the scope and magnitude of the problem. And I'm concerned that they're trying to divert attention to the problems that were caused by the reversal of these policies and trying to talk about it like it's in somehow better shape than our own eyes are showing us what's happening on the border right now.
Ron, I want to play for you a quick soundbite from one of the migrants that was interviewed here when Vice President Harris was in El Paso. He is from Nicaragua. Here is what he said. Listen.
As I told you, I asked for a reunification, and I am waiting for a response on the reunification. And as I told you, I cannot leave without my family. My wife is sick, my daughter is a baby, and the truth is, even if the United States wants to give me a negative answer, I will not accept it.
Will not accept a negative answer. Of course, Vice President Harris went to Guatemala to deal with the push factors, the root causes of migration, but the pull factors that officials like yourself talk about is when the migrants feel they have a better chance of getting across. In this case, he's now saying he's demanding he's coming if he can't get there the legal way.
It's a very concerning scenario. Your heart goes out to the people who are being oppressed or are being persecuted or are in dire straits. We all understand that as compassionate Americans. This is a country that has a rich history of immigration. But you can see the attitudes of people. You can see what the administration is putting forward. You know, they're not very concerned about immigration enforcement. In fact, they gutted immigration enforcement in the interior. And what we're seeing on the border is another signal to the globe that says if you come to the country under these conditions, we're going to let you in.
Yeah. In just a minute we've got left, Ron, I have to ask you, there's talk of Title 42 being rescinded. What are you hearing, and what would that mean if indeed they lift it?
Well, there was an article in the New York Times yesterday that said that the administration is considering that right now. It doesn't have a shelf life. It will end eventually. The important thing for your viewers to understand and people inside of government, they need to prepare for adult immigration beds to hold people in detention, because once Title 42 is over, the Border Patrol will not be able to expel people back into Mexico. And so the alternatives there are to hold them in detention so they can have their due process, or to release them at the border. And I will tell you, as somebody that did this work for many, many years, if they start releasing directly at the border single adults, we're going to have a wave like we've never seen. We're in record territory already. That would make it much more difficult for the border communities, for border security, and the men and women of the Border Patrol and their families.
That's frightening. Ron Vitiello, former acting ICE director and former Border Patrol chief, thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
Jackie?
Law enforcement under attack this week. In Colorado, police released video of Ronald Troike, the man who chased down and killed Denver police officer Gordon Beasley on Monday, along with chilling excerpts from a letter written by the shooter saying, quote, "My goal today is to kill Arvada PD officers." Meanwhile, in Florida, after a widespread manhunt, police captured Orthal Wallace, a suspect accused in the shooting of Daytona Beach police officer Jason Rayner. Rayner was shot in the head and remains in the hospital in critical condition. According to the reports, the shooter may have ties to a black militia group. Now, homicides in many major American cities have also skyrocketed. Year to date, Portland homicides are up 533%, Albuquerque 131%, Los Angeles County has seen a 111% increase, and Oakland is more than 82%. So for more on this, we're going to bring in former Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn. Thank you so much for being with us, Ed.
Good afternoon.
So as you have this rising crime, you also have a rise in police retirements and resignation. Over the course of the last year, New York City had a massive exodus. Chicago retirements were up 15% in 2020 compared to the year prior. How do you recruit and retain officers when you've got this sharp rise in crime compounding the challenge of staffing?
Well, I think all of those issues are magnified by what's basically been an unrelenting campaign to delegitimize, stigmatize, and dehumanize America's police officers. I think a climate's been created in which, the deranged as well as the career criminal, well armed, feel emboldened to engage their desires to basically assassinate police officers, as you've seen in Arvada and Fort Lauderdale. Nationally, I think it's no surprise that generally criminals are emboldened when police legitimacy has been undermined in city after city, as well as the agencies have been understaffed, that they feel it's their streets, not streets that are available to the average citizen. So it's an extraordinarily difficult set of circumstances, and it's very difficult to attract recruits to what is by any definition a dangerous and difficult job. It's difficult to attract recruits when they feel as though by accepting the badge and wearing it, they'll be vilified in the popular press. So it's a tough time.
There's a pretty broad sentiment that this political climate, this social climate, it's basically a tinderbox. One incident could spark a summer like we had last year. How do you think the Biden administration should respond as city mayors are expressing this fear that they've got really few options on how to regain control in their cities and curb this surge in crime?
Well, I think it's important for this administration to pay attention to its base, which is those people who live in cities that are vulnerable as potential victims of violence. I mean, the most victimized community in America is the African American community in central cities. They suffer terrible homicide rates. And I think, given the fact that those mayors are Democratic cities, not that I think any president would care about the party of the mayor, but I think the fact that they are a core constituency and they are very vulnerable should encourage the administration to continue making investments in quality criminal justice. I know they've made some moves recently that may be helpful in terms of spending some money for police hiring, but I think they need to reinforce some of the programs they've had for years that have transcended administrations and help the cities as rapidly as they can, because time is wasting.
The Biden administration said, effectively with announcements over the last week, that part of the solution to this is more gun control. What's your take on that?
Well, it's a variable. I mean, it's certainly not an immediate solution because, today somebody's going to get murdered with a gun that's already out there. There's 340 million firearms on the streets of America. Last I heard, we had more firearms than Americans. Certainly, it's an approach that is not harmful to crime control, and in the long term might be helpful. But right now, we've got a serious problem with the guns that are already out there in the hands of the wrong people who are not shy about using them. And I think that's what we've got to focus on.
One last question for you. Police reform talks on Capitol Hill. The Fraternal Order of Police is involved in these talks, but there's a big concern that rank and file officers are skeptical Washington can solve this. Yes or no? Do you think it's possible to get around that on the Hill?
Well, I think they're going to have to get around the qualified immunity issue, which I think has been grossly, badly oversimplified by those who pretend that police departments aren't already being sued. So I think that's got to be disposed of.
Ed Flynn, thank you so much for being with us. We've run out of time. Appreciate it.
Okay.
As millions of Americans plan on hitting the road, we will tell you what you need to know when we come back.